All right, thank you for all for attending the OWASP Sustainability Working Group. So we had the TC54 meeting today, and last meeting a month ago, I had mentioned to them that there was a very real possibility that the OWASP sustainability spec would be an independent thing outside of CycloneDX. And I think over like the last month, we've essentially solidified that, yes, in fact, it will be its own thing. So I brought that to TC54 today. And they're fine with that, obviously. The next step in getting this started is basically just a formality. Now, we need to create a scope and program of work. I basically copied the last one I did, which was for TG3, which is the Common Life Cycle Enumeration. Just changed a few things, but basically I left the words here so you can kind of see how the scope and programs of work are structured. It's a very, very simple document like this, but over the next couple of weeks, you and I think we need to collaborate on this document, flesh it out so that next month, when the TC54 meeting happens, we can actually vote in favor of establishing TG4. Sound good?
Sounds good. Could you add a link to that document to our sustainability working group use cases work document?
Absolutely. I will share that with you now and put the link to the document in there. If I can find your, let's see.
I'll take a closer look at it soon. I usually try to, I have a bad habit of being super optimistic in everything I do. So, I'll fix this tonight. And it always turns out that I forgot something or I'm not planning well. And so I say, I need to remember to say, I'll look at it soon.
Indeed. Yes.
There's a little bit of discipline is good to have. Okay, sweet. Did they have any other comments around this?
No. No comments. I think they're just going to be waiting for this. I do think we need to, because it's going to be its own spec, we will have to come up with a name for it eventually as well.
Yeah, I agree. And that's like you know how it goes, like how is it the most important thing in software computing, software development is the most 3 difficult things in software computing is like cache invalidation, naming things, off by 1 errors, and the base number selection.
Pretty much.
Yeah, something like that. Like, is it base 10 or base 2 or base 4 that now it was off by 1 in any case, and it depends on the base number you're using, the base number system. So since everything just becomes more difficult the moment you say, oh, we need something that involves software or computers or programming or open source. Off by 1 errors. That depends on the numbering system you're using. Could be off by 1 errors.
Indeed.
That could be a lot if you do it wrong. Okay. Should we just dive into what we have, or is there anything else?
Sure. No, that's it.
Okay, I'll share my screen then with you. I have recently upgraded my computer, so I'm always a little bit curious if this will continue to work. I won't do any fancy sharing. And this, Okay, so apparently I'm bad at sharing stuff here. Let's try again. Okay, I think that ought to be okay. All right. I went through the video recording of our last meeting earlier today, and I found out that I'm best listened to at a 1.5 speed. And so
Note to self.
note to self: speak faster, Salve, or at least, or think less. I don't know what's I need to do here. But I've gone through a bunch of this stuff here and cleaned up a little bit. The items we decided to put in the parking lot have been moved there together with some of the commentary. Might want to expand a little bit of why we decided to put it down there, but we can wait with that until later. I've also started adding a 5th appendix with where I'm thinking we should decide make some definitions of the different types of support levels that are offered. Now, I know this touches upon the topic that is being discussed in the common life cycle enumeration. SIG, I think it is, or working group, I don't know, remember. But I had a chat with Benji there 2 weeks ago or so, and the most important thing that came out of that discussion is that he considers what we're doing here as being upstream of what he's doing.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah, so that means we are free to just do our brain dump and see if we can have at least a meaningful selection of support levels or support claims or offerings that people can pick and choose between. There's more to this because I can imagine there are open source projects, for example, that do have some commercial offerings. And then there's the new stuff coming from the European Union with the Cyber Resilience Act. And there's a couple of things that are support offered related to what is offered and support, but that isn't claimed by the maintainer. And specifically, I'm thinking about the concept of a custodianship, that someone in an ecosystem might be a custodian or take upon themselves to be a custodian on behalf of another project because they are not responsive or there's something important that needs to be fixed right now. The making that official somehow or clear for end users, I think is super useful. But that one, as it is in this list right now, it's one of those that I'm not entirely sure how to fit into this, because last meeting we basically decided that the ecosystem related issues we have moved to the parking lot. So maybe custodianship needs to be just skipped. Which kind of hurts me because it's a super useful thing to have.
It is super useful. One of the use cases that I personally see is even if, for example, a nonprofit foundation has lots of open source projects, not all of those would actually fall under some kind of custodianship. There's many open source things that actually would not.
Yeah, and for me, custodianship is an emergency thing. It's not something that you do lightly.
Right.
And it's kind of you're taking charge of somebody else's project. It's like downstream taking charge of some upstream project because the upstream project isn't responsive.
Right.
Uh,
Um, we
that's
should probably talk about custodianship and stewardship, not together, but in the same kind of context, because just like not every open source project is going to have a custodian, right? Because again, it's kind of a, in many cases, it's going to be a last ditch effort type of thing. But again, like even for stewardship, right? Just because something is under a foundation, not everything is going to be, that foundation is not necessarily going to be a steward for every single open source projects they have, right? It doesn't work that way. So these two concepts actually have, in my opinion, a lot of similarities, and we should probably tease those out a little bit. Um,
Yeah.
and
When Okay, go
yeah,
ahead.
I think it would be good to get maybe to reach out to folks at the Eclipse Foundation and OpenSSF to get kind of their input on both custodianship and stewardship.
I already have had quite a long involvement with both folks in the Open Regulatory Compliance Working Group and in the OpenSSF. And if when you talk about those two organizations and the word steward, I'm assuming you are talking about stewards as they are meant from the European Union and the Cyber Resilience Act, or
Yeah,
is it
that's
then
correct.
different? Yeah, okay. So this steward role, um, that is an organization right now that is being heavily discussed what it actually means, and this ORC folks, they have a certain image on what that looks like. Usually, it is a foundation that it could be one of several things. It could be an organization that is working on behalf of a commercial open source project, where it's both open source and commercial offerings are offered. Whether or not that is a real thing or something that has is clear enough so it actually works against the law is a bit unclear to me right now, because the moment commercial activities are involved, then the Cyber Resilience Act basically says you should be a manufacturer and live up to the much stricter requirements that the steward has to live up to. And then there are the open source projects that just are their own thing. Usually those would only have to do a minimum of self-assessment and nothing much, or they don't have to, as long as they don't earn money somehow. Then they could just leave it up to downstream packages and operative systems or other people who integrate their product or their project into their offering to take care of any requirements around that. And then there are the foundations that have lots and lots of projects under their umbrella. That could be the Apache Foundation or the Eclipse Foundation or the Linux Foundation. Some of them have hundreds or even as much as 1,000 projects. Each and every one of these projects underneath that foundation umbrella, I can't tell you what's going on there, but my impression is from the meeting and this hearing what the OpenSSF people, who have quite a few people who work on this particular topic, is that they are recommending that the foundations involved will be functioning as a steward formally, so that they will be basically in the business of supporting the projects that they have under their umbrella, and therefore also live up to the light touch regime that the Cyber Resilience Act is talking about, whatever that means. And then there's a final type, which is where that is the one which I'm caring a lot about, and that is the ecosystem steward. And those come in different shapes and forms. You have the large ecosystems where there's a tight connection between the publishing platform or the publishing ecosystem, like the PyPI and the Python Foundation. Or there might be a much looser connection between those, and that's like it would be between my community, the CPAN ecosystem, and the Perl community, who has a foundation, the Perl Racco Foundation, but the Perl and Racco Foundation has absolutely nothing to do with anything related to software. They're just like a fiscal host and take care of a trademark and do some grants and stuff like that, as we talked about before. Those are, so to me, looking at those 3 or 4 scenarios, I'm thinking the most sensible way to involve or talk about the steward is as an organization that it works, and it doesn't say anything what type of organization it is, and the Cyber Resilience Act doesn't specify anything at all, actually. But that works for the long-term sustainability and security of the projects that are in their care. And what that means is also not defined in any way in the law. So it's left basically up to the communities themselves to figure out where this goes. And if I'm going to put in my thoughts on how this could be implemented, I would say for an open source projects perspective, they would have to only do 2 things, and they can opt out. This is an opt-in thing. They have to actively choose to do so, and if they do nothing, then everything is as before. They have to actively say that the project they are in charge of is intended for commercial activities. That basically is a claim that they would like to play along with the Cyber Resilience Act and the light touch regime that they would like to introduce to open source projects. And right now, that light touch regime is very light touch. It's just like make sure that a certain documentation exists, and usually it already does, and that you have a contact point that you can reliably reach out for security issues, and quite a lot of projects already have that. And just having a security.txt or a file that describes the security policy is probably one of those items, and lots of projects already have that. So this is a really low bar to step over, and should be quite doable. But the reason the steward comes in there is that the manufacturers still have to somehow live up to their much stricter requirements, and that would include that they perform due diligence on their software, the software they're putting into their products, or that they depend on for their projects to work. And this could include a web service that they use in order for an app that they're selling to function properly. Or they don't even have to sell the app. If the app, for example, is a ticketing app for a public transport company, then they are earning money on offering transport. The app is just there as a convenience, but it's part of a business. And because it's part of a business, the Cyber Resilience Act has an opinion of what's going on there. And if that app uses some web server backend with an API or something, that web server backend and the stack that is being used there is going to have to live up to the security demands in the Cyber Resilience Act for manufacturers. And those demands are pretty strict. They're quite substantial. And the most important thing in there is that if those dependencies that they use, the software, the components they depend on require, or I mean, if they are an open source project, most likely they are using open source frameworks or libraries or operative systems, they have to perform due diligence on that. If it's part of a exposed, connected to the internet part, they have to do the risk assessment, and based on whatever assessment is there, they have to do some due diligence, check if everything seems okay. Is this written in a sensible way? And if they are using an open source framework, for example, then they have to be sure that the open source framework doesn't contain any bad security practices or code or backdoors or stuff like that. And if they want to perform that due diligence, they will probably want to perform it together with the maintainer of the project, of the framework. And if they do that, then we get a new interesting situation, and that is that lots of businesses will maybe be contacting the same project to do the same work, and that would probably require some kind of coordination effort. And if the open source project themselves have to do that, this is not acceptable for people who are operating on a volunteer basis. And that's where the real value of an open source steward comes in, as a coordinator and facilitator between maintainers and manufacturers. But all this starts with the maintainer saying that what they have is intended for commercial activity. Because if it's not, then it's still the responsibility of the manufacturer to live up to the law and the requirements there. So I would say when it comes to what is offered of support, having a field that says this is intended for commercial activities or for commercial use, that should be enough, actually. But you need also to select a steward. And whether or not it's an ecosystem steward or a foundation that you're working on behalf, or another other type of steward that is willing to be the facilitating organization between you and your users, is up to the maintainer themselves to pick that. That's my mental model of how this is most likely going to work. And I am trying to figure out how all the different types of scenarios can play out based on what I've been listening in on since like last summer and before that, and my own readings of the Cyber Resilience Act. And the thing I just told you is the one that I think can work and make sense and scale to the point where it actually works for large ecosystems where we're talking about tens of thousands of projects out there. Not everyone will probably have to think about security in the same sense, because not every project is in use in the commercial setting. But if it is, then we have to have a way to start this kind of process. And the sustainability aspect comes in there by the fact that this work here, we're talking about due diligence, checking the code if it's sane, there's no backdoors. We are in Perl, you're using the 3-argument open and not the 2-argument open. You don't pass along environment variables directly to system commands, and you don't have SQL injection attack weaknesses and all that stuff, all the good shit. That takes work. That takes time, and that needs funding because it's boring work. I've gone through a due diligence of one product, and that was just between a bunch of releases from the last time the auditor came. And holy crap, that is boring work. Just looking through changelog and code and see, does this make sense? Yes. This is something which you kind of have to have a routine working on all the time. With sign off and a sensible way of working all the time, a little every time, instead of massive, I don't know the English word for it, when you postpone a job until the last moment, and so it becomes like a
Procrastinate.
massive one. No, not the act of procrastination, but should act of postponing. So the job becomes big. You are waiting until the job is as large as possible and the deadline is as short as possible, and then you start. That's
Insanity.
kind of yeah, that kind of pattern is like way too common, sadly. And so, but the work still needs to happen, and therefore it needs to be funded, because it's boring. Nobody does stuff like that for fun, I think, unless they have other things going on in their life, which is worse. So in short, from a support level offered perspective, saying that a project is intended for commercial use is kind of a small step towards commercial support, but it's not properly. It's just like we're doing a little bit more than just saying that it's maintained. We're also making a promise, explicit promise to say, for example, we will be available on this email address so we can respond quickly in case of a vulnerability is discovered.
Yeah.
And that alone in itself is worth a separate field or a separate level. But there is also more to that, and that's, you have to have a steward if this is going to work, or scale at least. And yeah, a bunch of more other things. Okay, that was my rant for today.
All good.
Does it make sense?
Yeah. No, it makes perfect sense. And I think I got a little bit more clarity on a lot of things too, and how this could potentially fit into a specification. So
Yeah.
I think we can absolutely include custodianship. I don't think this is going to be too far of a stretch, be able to support from a specification perspective.
Yeah, but here's the thing. This is when it comes to custodianship, which is different from stewardship.
Yes.
Custodianship is somebody else takes care of your project on an emergency basis. Like, okay, because you have moved to Malaysia and are in the middle of a jungle somewhere and offline, and you're living the best life you've ever had, and it's fantastic, and you're swimming in hot water springs and diving from waterfalls, and it's a fantastic life, but the software still needs to be taken care of, and somebody says, okay, I'll do it then, damn it, just in case something shows up. But how would we communicate that something is under custodianship? Since we just basically last meeting decided we're not going to have a second file that is being published by the ecosystem host.
Yeah, I think it would be fairly simple, actually. Honestly, I mean, if we have only a single file to describe all the sustainability information, right?
Yeah.
What we can do, what we can do in this particular case is have an array of organizations or individuals. So a custodianship might actually be temporarily offloaded to a company, right? It's possible. More likely, it's going to be offloaded to one or more individuals. It doesn't have to be a single individual. It could be more.
Right.
So if we had an array that supported both a person object and an organization object, I think that would be, I think based on what you described, I think that would be fairly easy to do.
That would be that what you're talking about now is that the maintainer declares that somebody is or can be a custodian.
Sure.
Yeah. The scenario I'm having in mind is the scenario where the maintainer does not do that.
Okay.
They don't
Well, I
have
mean,
any, but somebody still needs to step up, and I
right.
call that person a custodian.
Right, exactly. And it doesn't really matter who declares it, who claims it, right? As long as the specification can support an array of individuals or organizations,
Yeah.
and an organization, right? In the case of like an ecosystem, well, that would be an organization.
Yeah.
It is a
So,
collection of people.
yeah. Um, okay, let's just go practical a moment here. Let's say the way we communicate all this sustainability metadata is in the form of a dedicated file that is being put into a public open source public Git repository, for example, on GitHub or GitLab or whatever, and possibly also put into the release tarballs when a release is published, with a link to the original, where so people can get that up-to-date information. Now, the people who have access to the primary repository is the maintainer, nobody else. So if somebody who is not the maintainer is going to claim that this now has been taken under custodianship, somebody is taking care of it on their behalf, but they do not have access to the repository.
GitHub actually has this feature built in where in the case of death, the ownership of that repository switches hands.
Right. But in that case, you have prepared that somebody can take over, and you might even have a co-maintainer, or at least a succession plan or something like that, which is awesome. But the situations that I have in mind are not the situations like that. That's a best case kind of situation that you described, that where people know what they're doing and they prepare for the future, and if they pass away or get lost in the jungle, then there's a plan B that they can start going on and contact GitHub to take over ownership or whatever. But the fact of the matter is that a lot of projects, maybe most projects, don't have that. We still need to be able to communicate that something has happened and this is now being taken care of. Sure. And we cannot depend on the project itself actually having done the due diligence on this type of due diligence.
No, I think that's where the ecosystem comes in, right? I mean,
exactly,
that's kind of, yeah, I understand that. And I think in terms of a specification, see, we've spent a lot of time, I think, describing all the different things that we would want to what we would want to assert or consume in terms of data for sustainability. What we haven't really discussed yet is what is the file name that we will use in the repo, and more importantly, from an ecosystems perspective, how are you going to get the sustainability information? What is the URL? What's the parameters for that to get that from the ecosystem itself?
Yeah, but this is even more, and this is the point which I'm trying to lead you towards, and that is from the ecosystem usually only needs to be a distributor. They get something from upstream and make it available for downstream. This is a read and share type of operation. You get something, you publish on it, and then you share it. There's no writing involved almost by default. And the only like in my ecosystem, the only writing that is done is when it comes to certain metadata about the um, project itself, like the tarball that has been uploaded. And that's an access right. Who gets to upload new releases? And who is the, which is another way of saying who is the co-maintainer, who gets to publish on the project in the ecosystem. And within that, we have also a way to communicate that a co-maintainer is needed. So for CPAN's case, to communicate that you want a co-maintainer is the way you do it is that you set the co-maintainer field in the access the list to be a special user called need help. And that's it. It's super simple. It's almost banal in a sense, but it gives the point here that this space is for rent. This is available. Somebody can fill it in and step up if they want to. And in the same way goes, it could go for other types of situations. For example, if the project shouldn't be passed on to another user, then you can specify a no exfer as a special user. But when we're talking about custodianship, maybe if the ecosystem wants to say something. Now, the thing I'm thinking about here is that we're talking about the file that the ecosystem folks actually don't have access to. Certainly not the primary original authoritative version of it. They can always fork it on GitHub and then create a new release and then greenlight the release on the ecosystem and thereby forcing a new version to be released, which is what's already been done. But it's kind of magic. It's something that happens in the background, and I think that's a really bad thing in the sense that it doesn't communicate that this happens despite the situation, not because of everything is okay. It's an emergency that is being handled here by having a release being published. And that's why I think the custodian role or claiming that something is under custodianship is super useful. But in my case that I'm talking about is it's an ecosystem that declares that there's a special thing going on. And if the maintainer declares that there is someone who can take over, this is pretty much the same as having a successor or having a low effort co-maintainer or emergency co-maintainer or something. It's kind of different. So I would say if personally, I would like to use the word custodian for this specific role, but the specific situation I just used here. But if custodian, the word, the concept custodian, in as far as you understand, being a native English speaker, better fits to something that you described, then we need another word for this organization stepping in and doing something on behalf of the maintainer, the organization as in the ecosystem folks. So and I'm specifically looking for clarity here. Like what words could we use that distinguish between those two scenarios?
Yeah, naming things is hard.
Yeah, I know.
And we don't have to solve it on today's call. But yeah, no, I agree. I mean, these are very, very different. I mean, the outcome is the same, but the use cases are entirely different.
Yes.
And the way that the end user is going to get the information is also going to be different.
Yeah.
So we need to cover that. I do think that we can probably proceed with let's focus on the spec, because I think the document is in a really good state in my opinion. And I think we could theoretically actually start working on the spec um now actually. I don't think it's too early. And when we get to the custodian part, um, we can decide whether or not we want to include it or not. But regardless, I think it would be good to start pulling in some of the voices from the various ecosystems, right? Get somebody from Maven Central, get somebody from NPM, PyPy,
Yeah.
etc. Um, and get their opinions on what like how would they how would an ecosystem actually do this, first of all. Would they actually contribute to writing something about a project that the maintainer themselves have not written?
Yeah.
That's question number one, right? And if they are
Well,
willing to do that, then we need to figure out, well, what content are they willing to write, and does that fit into what we're trying to do here? And if so, then we can talk about, like, well, how do you anticipate publishing that information out? Is there going to be a standard way to do it? Is it going to be ecosystem specific? You know?
yeah. Right now, I think punting this is basically what we decided on last
Yeah,
meeting,
yeah, yeah.
so we can just do it.
As long as we leave room for it in the future, we design the spec in a way where maybe in 1.1, right, we revisit that and we put it in there.
Yeah. Let's see, is it possible to do strike over? Yeah. Oh well, I'm gonna just do make it red. So okay, we're gonna move that. Or oh, here's what I'm gonna do. Haha. This is how we already done it, so no problems. Okay, cool. So there's maybe room to use something like a custodian, or what would you call it? Uh, Backup role, or somebody who can step in. For me, the having a succession plan usually implies that you tell who the next main maintainer or benevolent dictator for their life is going to be once the original BDOF or passes on.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few different words that we can kind of toy with. We can do like a substitute, right? So one person replacing somebody else. Um, Substitute or replacement, right? Either one would work. You could do a proxy, so one person acting on behalf of somebody else. You could do a surrogate. So as a maintainer, I appoint you as my surrogate while I'm, living my best life, or I'm on vacation or whatever. Um, but
Surrogate.
yeah, so those are some things that we could potentially toy with. We could also toy with the concept of you know, like in the business world, right? You've got like maybe an acting director, right? They're not actually full-time doing that. They are assuming the role temporarily. They are
Right.
an
Yeah.
acting maintainer or whatever. Or you could say you are the interim, um, you know, maintainer type of thing. So I think there's some words that we can theoretically play with. We can also
Yeah.
play with the word, like in your email clients in the corporate world, you can designate somebody to work on your calendar, for example. So we can toy with that word as well. So I think we have some choices. Coming up with a word that is going to be understood enough, not
Yeah.
just in the English speaking world, but in non-native English, is going to be critically important because this is a
Yeah.
very nuanced type of um, capability that we're adding to the spec. So,
Yeah. I think that sounds good. And let's, I've added this now to the list here, and we can take it further when time comes for that.
okay.
But before we stop, like we have 10 minutes left before we no time. I've added a couple of the um, support levels that I've thought of. And right now, the ones I have is unmaintained, casually maintained, done, deprecated, security only, superseded, archived. Those are like the main ones.
Mhm.
And each of them have nuances in it. For example, archived is something that apparently they're using in PyPI to say that it's taken off the map.
Mhm.
You might be able to find it, but it won't come back. This is it's on in the attic. It's just yeah, we know where it is, but don't expect you to use it. And if you're using it, then you might need to find something else. I'm not entirely sure if this is the same as deprecated.
Mm.
Because deprecated in my mind says it means the somebody actively cares that you should stop using something uh, because there might be a replacement that they want to move everybody to use instead of the thing that is deprecated. It might be maybe a re-implemented version of a library, which has roughly the same API, perhaps. But the old one is going to die, and they want to just say, please do not use this on a
Right.
library level instead of on an API level. Don't know, is there enough nuance here to that it warrants its own word in own level in this list here? That's one thing we need to think about. Superseded
Yeah.
is also a topic, something I've seen being discussed in the same way, in a sense, where deprecated and superseded could be mean exactly the same. It's just one is a word that is positively laden, and the other one is negatively laden.
Right. I think, you know, from a specification perspective, I think if we were to visualize like what a spec would look like, you might actually have an option for deprecated. And then if something is deprecated, you could optionally say if something supersedes it or not.
What would the difference? Where lies
You're
the difference?
Yeah, you're saying that, you know, this package as it is we're done with it. We have deprecated this. People could continue using it, obviously, but we have taken the code, we have completely refactored it, And now it's this new package over here. We want
Yeah.
everyone to use this new thing.
Right. So, so this is for the case where we can have situations where something is deprecated, but there's nothing that supersedes it.
Right.
And we can have something where that is not deprecated, but there is something that supersedes it, because while the old software is still supported at least
True.
a little, it's you'd better be off. You'd be better off with the new one. Okay, so there's a reason to have both.
Yeah,
Archived.
yeah. I
Be superseded by or superseded.
don't know if um see archive, I think of the GitHub archive bit, right? And then from my IT background, I'm like, okay, where did you archive it? Because a GitHub repo is not necessarily an archive because I can delete that repo. And I'm not sure if there's enough difference between something being archived and unmaintained.
Yeah.
Because aren't they the same?
I got the impression that unmaintained remains published while archived is unpublished. That's my reading of this. I might be mistaken though.
What do you mean by unpublished?
Meaning that it used to be published, but it's now taken off the publishing platform and moved into its
Oh, it's
own thing.
offline. Oh, I see. That's
Well,
interesting.
it's still. My reading is that it's still available, but not on the main publishing platform. It might be in an archival or like maybe for CPAN it would be on Backpan, which is the complete archive of everything over that has always been published or has ever been
Right.
published. That's my reading. I might have misunderstood something though.
No, that's a use case I never considered. Yeah, words are hard.
Yeah, it's a meaning strictly that they come along and they need to be clear.
Yeah.
The
Yeah,
meaning of
yeah.
words. Yeah.
And I think again, my mind went directly to like GitHub archive bit, and it went directly to like an IT type of archive. And this is not it's not either one of those things, which makes it interesting. I think we do have to realize that whatever word we come up with to describe these things, I think it's safe to say that the overwhelming majority of people who adopt the spec will never actually read the spec.
Well, in this, even if you have a JSON schema that describes what this means, a documentation string that together with the keyword, that's something that can be exposed, and that's good enough for me. End users beyond that, and that specification can also be exposed to that text could also be exposed through any user interfaces like command line tools or whatever they use to create a file like these. So as long as we can come with a clear definition, and put it somewhere, I'm fine.
Yeah.
Last point worth spending 1 calorie on is the idea of only committing to security updates.
Right. Yeah, I think that's an important one because there's got to be some open source projects that do that.
Yeah, seem to remember having encountered that, but I cannot name any like just on a offhand.
Right.
And security only is basically then unmaintained plus something extra, or casual plus something extra.
Right.
Or,
Exactly.
or done plus something extra.
Exactly. Yeah.
Would it make sense to, instead of having a list of words with definitions that you can pick one of, then we rather have a list of types of activities that you are willing to do, like bug fixes? Yes, I will do bug fixes now and then, but only critical bug fixes, or only security vulnerabilities, or only compatibility fixes because it needs to work on the latest version of Mac OS 10 or 12 or 11 or whatever.
I think that is a really, so yeah. So one thing that we could theoretically do is, yeah, I see security only as not necessarily one of these support levels. It's a very specific type of activity, like you said. So one thing that we could potentially do from a spec perspective is have predefined support levels like what we have here, and then also offer the ability for the maintainer to specify their own support levels with the activities that they are willing to do. And from a spec perspective, we could actually support both scenarios. Not overly difficult.
Yeah. Okay, let's think about it until next meeting. So since we're
Okay.
at the end of time. So
Yep.
thanks for the discussion.
Thanks, Salve. Cheers.
All
Have a
right.
good day.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.